Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong? She didn't move, just stood at the edge of the briefing room, uniform pressed, boots silent against the cold concrete floor. A handful of eyes lingered, some skeptical, some amused. Every mocking glance hit sharper than any bullet she had ever dodged. And yet she said nothing. Her gaze alone was heavy enough to make the room still. It carried a weight they couldn't name, a quiet authority that wasn't given. It was earned piece by piece in silence. The commander cleared his throat, glancing at her from the head of the table. "Lieutenant Hart," he said, "we'll need your assessment on the North Ridge operation." Her jaw tightened. Assessment. Not command, not strategy, just a report delivered with measured civility. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would slice through the unspoken judgments, but she didn't. Instead, she let her eyes linger on the map laid out before them. Topographical lines, ridges, sparse tree clusters, an enemy-held position tucked in the folds of a valley that was more trap than terrain. Her mind moved faster than their words. She imagined herself there, dust in her mouth, wind in her face, rifle snug against her shoulder, heart hammering against the restraint of discipline. She had walked these ridges before, though not in boots like these. She had moved through fire and silence, carrying someone else's life in her hands, someone she had sworn to protect and failed. She swallowed, letting the memory sink like a stone into the quiet. A junior officer snorted behind her back. "Thought she was just paperwork," he muttered, loud enough for some to hear. Her hands curled at her sides, fingers brushing against the fabric of her gloves. She could have turned, she could have shouted. She could have reminded them in one small, lethal movement that she had lived where they only theorized, but she didn't. Her silence was a message of its own. It always had been. Words, she knew, were easy. Eyes were harder to evade. The briefing continued. Tactical details spilled across the table. Patrol schedules, weak points, anticipated enemy reactions. Every so often, someone glanced at her, half expecting a flinch or a tremor that never came. They didn't know the full story. They couldn't know that last spring, when the convoy went dark and the world tilted on its edge, she had crawled through mud and blood, dragging a comrade to safety. That the night was a silence so complete she could still hear the echo of his last breath. And she didn't tell them, not yet. Why would she? People often misunderstood courage for arrogance. Or worse, they mocked it. They whispered, questioned her place here. They labeled her paper-thin, a soldier in name only. But experience had taught her patience. Strength was quiet, deliberate. Sometimes it was a stare that cut through laughter and doubt. Sometimes it was holding your ground while the world tried to make you fold. The briefing ended with a nod from the commander, a terse, "Prepare your teams. We move at dawn." Others packed up, eager to escape into the artificial warmth of the sunlit base. She stayed a beat longer, fingers brushing over the cool table, mapping the terrain again in her mind. She could see the enemy positions, the choke points, the ridges that would be death if approached carelessly. Her eyes narrowed. She had a plan already, though she had not voiced it. Outside, the wind caught the tattered flags along the perimeter. The base was quiet, but the quiet was deceptive. The hum of helicopters in the distance, the muted clatter of supply trucks, even the faint bark of a guard dog, it all formed a rhythm, a heartbeat of anticipation. She breathed in, letting the air settle in her lungs, dust and oil and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline. This was the air she had always moved in. She inhaled memory as easily as oxygen. A shadow moved along the wall behind her. A fellow operative, one of the few who didn't doubt her, leaned in, voice low. "You don't have to prove yourself, you know. Not today." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, though it never reached her eyes. "They think I do," she said softly. He nodded, silent acknowledgement. Some things didn't need explanation. Some burdens were carried alone. She felt the weight of it settle, the familiar knot of anxiety in her chest that came before any mission. Not fear, not exactly, but the acute awareness that everything could change in a heartbeat. That all your experience, your training, your careful planning might still be meaningless against the randomness of war. She walked to the edge of the compound, boots crunching on gravel, and looked toward the north ridge. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the valley. She imagined herself there, scanning the ridgeline, imagining angles, firing positions, escape routes. Each thought sharpened her focus. Each memory of survival reminded her why she couldn't fail. And yet, a ghost of doubt lingered. Could she carry the weight again? Could she lead them through fire and still remain the person she was trying to protect herself? The night came early. The base settled into muted activity. Guards rotated, radios crackled, lights flickered on in dormitories. She retreated to her quarters, closing the door against the low murmur outside. She stripped the uniform jacket, letting exhaustion seep into her bones. She touched the photograph pinned above her cot. A man's face, kind eyes, a reminder of the promise she had failed to keep. Her hand lingered. She whispered a name no one else would hear, no one else would understand. Regret, unspoken and raw, filled the small room. And then she let it go just a little, letting it settle into resolve. Tomorrow she would walk into the valley. Tomorrow her gaze would speak louder than any words. And tomorrow she would show them, without boasting, without declaration, that strength could live in silence, that courage could be a presence, not a proclamation. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe she could act again. Why did the first light of dawn feel heavier than the night? She moved along the edge of the compound, the gravel biting at her boots, the chill of the morning clinging to her skin. The world was quiet in that fragile, pre-sunrise way, but she knew the valley beyond was alive with danger. Every ridge, every hollow, every shadow could conceal an enemy waiting. And she had to anticipate them all, not just for herself, but for the men and women who would follow her lead. Her team gathered silently, faces familiar but each carrying their own tension. She scanned them, catching small gestures, fingers tightening around rifles, a jaw set too rigidly, eyes flicking nervously toward the horizon. They didn't see it yet, but she had seen worse. She had carried fear before, held it in her chest and turned it into movement, into decisions that saved lives. She had learned that panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. The youngest of the group, Private Lennox, looked at her with a mixture of awe and doubt. She remembered her own first mission, the way her hands had trembled, the way she had wanted to vanish beneath the weight of expectation. She stepped closer, voice low and steady. Focus on the path ahead, not the doubts behind. He nodded, swallowing hard. She allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. Leadership wasn't just orders. It was presence. It was quiet reassurance. It was the confidence that your team could draw from your resolve without you saying a word. Convoy moved out. Engines hummed, tires kicking up dust that clung to the air. She sat in the lead vehicle, scanning, calculating, remembering every ridge, every hollow from satellite images and reconnaissance reports. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. A scar on her memory from a previous mission, one where hesitation had cost lives. She carried it in silence, a reminder that certainty was fragile, and sometimes courage was just continuing when fear whispered louder than logic. The valley opened before them like a living map, ridges rising sharply, sparse trees swaying in the wind. The team's chatter was minimal, as if instinctively understanding the gravity of the space. She could hear the clatter of radios, faint but persistent, the heartbeat of coordination, yet every sound seemed distant, filtered through her focus. They approached the first choke point. The rocks jutted sharply, offering both cover and danger. She crouched low, eyes scanning, every movement measured, deliberate. She could almost feel the presence of someone waiting just beyond the line of sight. Her pulse quickened, not in fear but in awareness. The line between life and death was measured in seconds, in decisions, in clarity. A rustle, she froze. The team followed her lead, silent, tension stretching across the valley like taut wire. A figure emerged, not enemy, just a stray goat startled by the convoy. Relief washed over the team, but she didn't relax. Not yet. Composure was a shield, and she couldn't afford cracks, not here. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher, shadows shifting across the ridges. Every bend in the terrain brought new calculations, sniper positions, potential ambush points, escape routes. She kept notes in her mind, committing every detail to memory. Her body ached in ways that reminded her of previous missions, of nights spent crawling through mud, of hands slick with sweat and blood. Yet she pressed on. She had to. During a brief halt, she watched her team. Lieutenant Ramirez was adjusting a scope, muttering under his breath about a faulty mechanism. Corporal Nguyen was checking the comms, glancing toward her for approval. She met each gaze with calm assurance. She couldn't speak all the truths she carried, the mistakes, the losses, but she could convey confidence. It was enough. For now. Private Lennox approached again, hesitant. "Lieutenant, what if we get trapped? What if the ambush?" She turned, eyes locking with his. She didn't have to speak. Her gaze was enough to silence the fear, to anchor the trembling thread of doubt. "We move with precision. We move as one. Nothing else matters." He swallowed again, nodding, a flicker of belief forming where doubt had been. She stepped away, scanning the ridges once more. The enemy could be anywhere. She felt it in the subtle shift of wind, in the echo of distant rocks tumbling, in the way the light changed against the cliffs. She had walked this path before in her mind, rehearsed every scenario, and yet the unpredictability of life on the edge reminded her that control was only an illusion. And then she saw it, a flash of movement at the far ridge, too deliberate to be wildlife. A single figure, armed, observant. She froze, letting the team settle into silent readiness. The operative moved, unaware they had been seen, but she knew the moment could tip the balance. She considered her options, weighing speed against caution, stealth against confrontation. Every second stretched, heavy with consequence. She raised her hand, signaling a halt. The convoy ground to a stop, dust swirling in slow motion around the tires. Her heartbeat synchronized with the world around her, sharp and deliberate. She didn't speak. Her gaze swept across the valley, assessing, calculating, commanding. The enemy didn't know it yet, but the rules had changed. They had underestimated the quiet in her, the lethal patience in her calm. The figure vanished, retreating behind the ridge. She exhaled slowly, releasing the tension she hadn't realized she was holding. The team looked at her, awaiting guidance. She gave the nod, subtle but decisive. They moved again, careful, precise, but the morale shift was subtle yet palpable. Confidence, once fragile, had been restored, not through words but presence. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the central ridge. The valley opened wide, enemy positions more defined. She crouched behind a boulder, scanning with binoculars. Her thoughts drifted briefly, unbidden, to the people she had lost, the mistakes that haunted her. Every glance, every decision carried weight far beyond the physical. She was not just leading a team, she was navigating memory, guilt, and the shadow of past failure. A whispered comm from Nguyen alerted them to movement below, a patrol just beyond the ridge, unsuspecting. She considered action, weighing every variable, angle, risk, consequence. She remembered a lesson hard-earned. Hesitation could be fatal, but reckless speed was equally dangerous. She chose patience. They watched, waited, calculated. Every moment was charged with the potential for catastrophe. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows across the valley, she allowed herself a small, private acknowledgement. They had survived the day intact, moving closer to their objective. But the mission was far from over. Her gaze lifted toward the horizon, the ridges etched in gold and shadow. Tomorrow would demand more, require harder choices, sharper reflexes, and the quiet courage she had come to rely on. She thought of the mocking words that had greeted her in the briefing room. They had meant nothing here, in the dust and wind of the valley. Presence mattered more than applause, silence more than praise, and she would carry that lesson forward, one ridge at a time. Sometimes the most profound victories were invisible to the world, but she felt them in the alignment of her breath, the steadiness of her hand, the quiet certainty that she would endure. And in that endurance there was a kind of redemption, slow, deliberate, silent, but undeniable. As night approached, she allowed herself a fleeting sense of hope. They had moved as one today, and sometimes hope was enough to light the way forward. Why did the valley feel alive, with whispers she couldn't name? Night draped over the ridges like a heavy curtain, shadows swallowing the terrain, soft wind carrying the scent of dust and pine. She crouched behind a jagged rock, rifle across her knees, ears attuned to the smallest sounds. The team had settled into cautious positions, every movement measured, almost reverent. Even the youngest, Private Lennox, was silent, aware of the unspoken gravity that hung between them and the unseen enemy. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the memory of past mistakes anchor her. The hum of helicopters, the distant chatter of radio, even the subtle rustle of leaves, everything sharpened. Experience told her something was coming, not yet clear, not yet revealed, but she could feel it, like the electricity in the air before a storm. "Lieutenant, you think they know we're here?" Nguyen's whisper broke the silence. She shook her head, keeping her voice low, firm. "They might, but awareness doesn't mean advantage. We stay calm, we wait. They'll show their hand first." Her team obeyed without question, though tension twisted each face differently. She watched, nodding subtle gestures. Ramirez adjusting his gloves, a slight tremor in his jaw, Lennox gripping his rifle too tightly. Each small detail mattered. Every crack in composure could be fatal. She breathed slowly, allowing herself to feel the weight of responsibility. The lives of the people in front of her were now intertwined with her choices, her judgment, her silent leadership. Movement caught her eye. A shadow shifted on the ridge below. Enemy patrol, armed, alert, methodical. She raised her binoculars, eyes narrowing. They were cautious, yet careless in the sense that she could predict their patterns, their blind spots, their rhythm. She inhaled, letting the calculations settle in her mind. The team was ready. She could sense their trust, fragile but present. They looked to her for a decision, and she weighed every factor: distance, terrain, reaction time, escape routes. One wrong move could trigger chaos. She had walked this tightrope before. Fear was not her enemy, hesitation was. "Hold fire," she murmured, though her voice barely rose above the whisper of the wind. The enemy moved closer, unaware of the eyes studying them from above. She considered the timing, the precision, the ethics of action. Killing wasn't the point. Survival, mission success, careful calculation, that was the point. The night deepened, stars hidden behind low clouds. She shifted slightly, repositioned, keeping herself unseen. Her mind flickered briefly to the photograph on her cot, the man she had lost, the promise she had failed to uphold. Every movement she made, every decision, carried a fragment of that memory. It was both anchor and burden. She drew strength from it, even as it ached in her chest. Suddenly, a twig snapped below. She froze. The team followed her lead, hearts likely racing though their breaths were shallow and controlled. She could see the tension in their bodies, mirrored in her own muscles coiled like springs. And then nothing. The shadow retreated, a patrol moving cautiously away. She exhaled slowly, letting the tight coil of adrenaline loosen just a fraction. "We move at first light," she said finally, voice calm, authoritative. No argument, no hesitation. The team nodded, each silently accepting the decision. She trusted them to trust her. Trust had been earned in silence, in observation, in patience. Words could not replace it. Sleep was a luxury she refused, though exhaustion gnawed at her. She found a quiet spot, crouched low, letting her body rest while her mind stayed alert. Memories surfaced unbidden. Nights crawling through mud, the taste of blood and fear, the sensation of carrying someone heavier than herself, heavier than hope. She let them pass, acknowledging without dwelling, storing them like ammunition for the soul, reminders of what she had survived, what she could endure again. At dawn, the light was fragile, tentative. She rose first, careful, precise. The valley below glimmered in soft gold, ridges stark and alive with potential danger. She signaled the team, moving as one toward the central objective. Each step was deliberate, measured, the crunch of gravel beneath boots echoing softly in the valley. Every ridge, every shadow, every whisper of wind could hide a threat. Her awareness stretched, a taut string of vigilance. They reached a small clearing, barely wide enough to allow passage. She scanned for movement, nodding footprints, disturbed foliage, the subtle imprint of someone or something that had passed hours before. Her pulse quickened, but her exterior remained calm. Control was not absence of fear, but mastery of it. "Eyes up," she murmured, almost to herself. The team mirrored her stance, rifles ready, senses sharpened. She remembered her mentor's words, "Courage is silent until it has to speak." She felt that truth resonate deep in her chest. Her presence alone commanded attention, demanded obedience, not through intimidation, but through the quiet assurance of competence. The ridge line ahead held the enemy observation post. She observed patterns, nodding rotation, vigilance, and gaps in attention. Precision would win this, not brute force. She plotted every movement, every angle, every silent calculation. The team moved seamlessly under her lead, trusting her judgment even when the risks were invisible. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed, carried by the wind. The enemy had discovered something that could compromise them. She didn't panic. Instead, she froze, letting instinct guide her. Every detail mattered: the angle of shadows, the rhythm of patrols, the subtle vibration of the earth underfoot. She signaled the team, weaving them silently into cover, repositioning like shadows themselves. Private Lennox caught her gaze, hesitation in his eyes. She returned it with a look that needed no words. Calm, steady. They would survive if they trusted the plan, trusted her. Hours passed in tense anticipation. Movement, pause, observation, calculation. Sweat cooled on her skin, exhaustion whispered, but focus never faltered. The team moved as one under her quiet command, each small success a step toward survival. The enemy, methodical yet unaware, revealed their positions in increments, allowing her to anticipate, to control, to act without unnecessary risk. By evening they had secured the high ground, the enemy positions now mapped, their weaknesses visible. The team exhaled, relief barely masked by fatigue. She allowed herself a fraction of a smile, but it was fleeting. The mission was far from over. The weight of leadership, the ghosts of past mistakes, the haunting promise she carried, it all remained. She gazed at the valley below, sunlight now fading, casting shadows that felt like fingers stretching toward them. Tomorrow would demand more: risk, courage, silence, and patience. And she was ready, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned to act despite fear, to guide despite doubt, to endure despite loss. Sometimes the loudest victory isn't celebrated with noise. It's acknowledged in the steady breathing of a team, in the shared glance that says, "We survived together." And in that shared silence, she found her purpose. Why did the air feel heavier now, as if the valley itself was holding its breath? The morning sun cut through thin clouds, illuminating ridges and hollows in sharp contrast. She crouched behind a boulder, scanning the enemy positions below. Her team moved with quiet efficiency, shadows among shadows, rifles poised, breaths shallow but steady. Every muscle in her body was taut, a coiled spring of focus. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her boots, every vibration a whisper of potential danger. Her mind replayed memories she hadn't allowed herself to dwell on: each loss, each mistake, each hand she had failed to save. It was not fear that gripped her now. It was the weight of responsibility. The valley was a chessboard, and every move, every decision, could mean the difference between life and death. A subtle movement caught her eye, a patrol shifting along a ridge, unaware of their presence. She raised her hand, signaling the team to halt. Silence descended, heavy and almost tangible. She inhaled, feeling the sharp air in her lungs, counting the beats in her head. Patience was her ally. Impulsiveness could cost them everything. Private Lennox shifted nervously. His first mission had been relatively uneventful, but this was the kind of tension that etched itself into memory. She glanced at him, voice low and controlled. "Focus. Breathe. Watch the ridge, not the fear." He nodded, shoulders straightening slightly. Trust was fragile, but it could grow, and he needed to believe in her before the enemy would. They moved forward, careful and deliberate, each step a negotiation with the terrain, each breath a commitment to survival. She led them along a narrow path that wound around the ridges, exposing them to glimpses of the enemy below but offering cover from the sun's harsh glare. Every detail mattered: The angle of light on the rocks, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the slight shifts of the enemy's patrol. Then came the first gunshot. Sharp, sudden. A bullet whined past her shoulder, striking the ground with a cloud of dust. Her team hit the ground, rifles raised, eyes scanning. The enemy had discovered their presence, or at least suspected it. She remained calm, every breath measured, every thought precise. "Return fire only if necessary," she ordered softly, scanning for advantage. "Do not expose yourselves unnecessarily. Wait for my signal." Her team obeyed, hearts hammering in rhythm with hers. The valley was alive now, a living entity of tension, sound, and shadow. She felt every vibration, every shift, every possibility. Survival depended on anticipation, on patience, on the discipline to act decisively when the moment came. The enemy moved again, patrolling closer, unaware that she had already calculated the angles of approach, the likely escape routes, the potential risks of exposure. She gestured subtly, guiding her team to positions of advantage. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, almost invisible. She could see the fear and hope flickering across her team's faces, and she allowed herself a brief acknowledgement of pride. They were learning, surviving, trusting her judgment. A sudden shout echoed from below. A patrol had stumbled upon an abandoned supply crate, drawing attention. She froze for a heartbeat, heart tightening. Every detail mattered. Every reaction had consequences. Then she acted, signaling the team to split and move into cover, repositioning them to take advantage of the distraction. The enemy's attention was divided, and she seized the opportunity. Silent, precise, calculated, each movement a testament to experience, to survival, to resilience. She guided her team like a conductor, orchestrating a deadly, quiet symphony. Minutes stretched into hours, each moment a test of nerve and discipline. She felt the ache in her muscles, the sting of exhaustion, the gnawing anxiety that always preceded decisive action. Yet she moved with purpose, aware that every decision carried the weight of life and death. Finally, the immediate threat passed. The enemy patrols moved on, unaware of the observation and calculation that had unfolded above them. Her team exhaled collectively, tension easing slightly, but not entirely. She knew the valley had more challenges ahead, more threats, more opportunities to test resolve. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. The mocking words from the briefing room, the doubts cast upon her abilities, they had no power here. Not in the dust, the shadows, the quiet calculation of survival. Strength was silent, deliberate, present in action rather than proclamation. Private Lennox approached cautiously. "Lieutenant, how do you stay so calm?" She looked at him, eyes meeting his. She didn't answer with words. Her gaze alone conveyed the truth. Calm was not absence of fear, but mastery of it. He nodded slowly, understanding more than she could say. The day wore on, and they continued their careful advance, securing vantage points, mapping enemy movements, and preparing for the confrontation that was inevitable. She observed every ridge, every shadow, every subtle shift of wind, knowing that survival depended on anticipation, patience, and precise action. As night approached, the valley was bathed in a muted glow, shadows stretching long and ominous. She gathered her team, voice low but firm. "We've survived today. Tomorrow we confront the heart of their position. Rest now, but keep alert. The mission continues." They settled into positions for the night, weary but alive. She allowed herself a moment to close her eyes, to let the memories of past missions rise and fall, to draw strength from the lessons learned in pain and loss. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, but she bore it willingly. Sometimes courage was not loud. It was measured, deliberate, silent. It was present in the gaze that steadied, in the breath that controlled panic, in the movement that saved lives. And she carried it forward into the darkness, into the uncertain dawn, into the valley that demanded both resilience and sacrifice. She looked at the horizon, faint light flickering in the distance. Tomorrow would test them, but she was ready. Not because she had no fear, but because she had learned to act despite it, to lead despite doubt, and to endure despite loss. Sometimes the quietest decisions carried the heaviest weight, and sometimes the heaviest weight was the only thing that kept them alive. Why did the ridges suddenly feel like a cage rather than a path? The valley was silent now, the oppressive quiet that always precedes chaos. She crouched behind a jagged outcrop, eyes scanning every shadow, every contour of the terrain. Her team was tense, aware that the next few hours could decide the fate of the mission and their lives. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down like the rocks above, yet she bore it with the quiet resolve that had become her armor. The first sign came as a flicker of movement, a patrol crossing the clearing below. She raised her hand, freezing the team mid-step. Every eye followed hers, every breath slowing to match her calm rhythm. She could feel the fear coiled in their muscles, the raw nervous energy, and she let them anchor it, convert it into focus. She had done it before, she could do it again. "Remember," she whispered to Lennox, "fear is a tool. Use it, don't let it use you." He nodded, fingers tightening on his rifle, jaw set with determination she could respect. She allowed herself a flicker of pride. Leadership wasn't just issuing orders, it was instilling courage when none seemed possible. The enemy patrol was small but methodical. She observed, calculating angles, timing rotations. A snap of a branch, a soft murmur of conversation, it was enough. She signaled the team to move silently into cover, shifting like shadows themselves, rifles ready, eyes sharp. Her heart beat in rhythm with theirs, each pulse a reminder that even the smallest hesitation could cost lives. Minutes stretched. The patrol advanced unknowingly toward the trap she had envisioned. Precision was everything. Action, when it came, would be swift, deliberate, and measured. And then the first shot rang out. Sharp, almost surgical. One enemy fell, the rest scattering, shouting, scrambling. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Her focus was already on the next movement, the next calculation. Every second counted, and every choice could be fatal. The valley erupted in controlled chaos. Her team moved with quiet efficiency, covering one another, shifting positions with the precision she demanded. She felt the adrenaline surge, but beneath it was discipline, a mental clarity born of repeated survival, of lessons etched in blood and mud. Despite the danger, her mind flickered briefly to the past, the missions she had survived, the comrades she had lost, the mistakes that haunted her still. Every action she took now was guided by memory, by experience, by the weight of responsibility she could not relinquish. An enemy sniper appeared on the ridge opposite. She froze for a heartbeat, assessing the angle, the line of sight, the distance. Her pulse quickened, not in fear but in awareness. Every move, every breath, every decision mattered. She signaled her team to hold. She could handle this. She adjusted her position, rifle steady, eyes locked on the faint glint of the scope across the valley. Her finger hovered on the trigger, each heartbeat measured, each breath deliberate. The sniper shifted, unaware that they were being watched. She exhaled slowly, timing her shot with precision honed by years of silent training and hard-earned experience. One move, one action, and the threat would be neutralized. The shot rang out. The sniper was down. Relief washed over her briefly, but she didn't let it linger. There was more to do, more threats to anticipate, more lives to protect. Her team moved forward, clearing the ridge with calculated caution. Every crevice, every shadow, every rustle of foliage was a potential danger. She scanned constantly, aware that in this environment complacency was fatal. By afternoon, they had secured the ridge. The valley below was mapped, enemy positions catalogued, and a temporary calm settled over the team. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, feeling the ache of exhaustion in muscles long overworked, the gnawing weight of tension in her chest. Yet the relief was fragile. She knew the enemy was not defeated, only delayed. The real confrontation, the test of endurance and resilience, still lay ahead. She gathered her team, voice low but firm. "We hold here tonight. Tomorrow we move toward the objective. Rest but stay alert." The mission continues. That night she sat alone, rifle across her knees, eyes tracing the ridges in moonlight. Memories rose unbidden, faces she had failed, promises unkept, the haunting echo of last breaths carried in wind. She let herself feel the grief, the regret, the anger, but only for a moment. Then she let it go, folding it into determination. Sometimes courage was silent. Sometimes it was a gaze that steadied trembling hands. Sometimes it was the act of enduring, of moving forward when every instinct screamed to retreat. She glanced at Lennox, asleep but alert, chest rising and falling steadily. The youngest of the team had learned something vital today. Fear could be tempered, doubt could be overcome, and presence could command even in silence. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a sliver of hope. The valley had tested them, and they had survived. Not unscathed, not without struggle, but intact, with purpose still guiding every step. As she drifted toward sleep, one thought lingered. Sometimes the heaviest burdens were invisible to others. Sometimes the hardest victories were not celebrated with noise but lived quietly, endured with dignity, and remembered in silence. And she would carry that truth forward, ridge by ridge, battle by battle, into whatever awaited them next. Why did the valley feel like it was closing in, swallowing every sound, every shadow? The morning air was sharp, biting at exposed skin, carrying the scent of dust and pine and the faint metallic tang of tension. She crouched behind a boulder, scanning the ridges ahead with unrelenting focus. The enemy had regrouped overnight, reorganized, and now moved with purpose. She could feel it, the subtle shift in the valley's rhythm, the way shadows bent differently under the sun, the faint stir of leaves where no wind had passed. Danger was near, and this time it would not be subtle. Her team was tense, aware that every step could trigger disaster. Even Lennox, who had gained confidence, tightened his grip on the rifle, eyes wide with the mix of fear and determination she had learned to recognize. She gave him a brief, steadying look. No words, just presence. The weight of her gaze conveyed all the guidance he needed. They moved forward, each step calculated, silent, deliberate. She knew the terrain intimately by now, the choke points, the hidden gullies, the ridges that could hide death. Her mind was a constant machine of observation, calculation, and prediction. She scanned the enemy positions, patrols, sniper nests, observation points. Every detail mattered. A sudden flash of movement caught her eye, a squad moving down from the ridge, weapons ready. The enemy had spotted signs of their advance. Her chest tightened, but she did not panic. She raised her hand, freezing the team, calculating every angle, every possible response. She had trained for this, survived this, and yet every mission carried its own heartbeat, its own risk, its own moral weight. She could hear the faint whisper of Lennox's breath behind her. He trusted her. She could not fail him or any of them. Not again. The enemy advanced with confidence, unaware that she had already predicted their pattern. She signaled Ramirez to flank left, Nguyen to cover right, and guided her team into positions of advantage. Every movement was silent, precise, deliberate. One misstep, one noise could ignite chaos. Gunfire erupted suddenly, sharp, chaotic, immediate. The valley was alive with the sound of combat, rifles echoing off cliffs, the soft thud of footsteps on rock, the rustle of foliage, and the subtle hum of tension that bound them together. She moved seamlessly with her team, each action deliberate, each shot calculated. Survival depended on precision, patience, and discipline. A grenade rolled near Lennox's position. Without hesitation, she dove, kicking it out of the way, shielding him with her own body. The blast exploded nearby, throwing dust and pebbles into the air, but they survived. Lennox gasped, eyes wide, and she allowed herself a fleeting acknowledgement. Fear had not broken them. Not yet. The enemy responded, taking cover, firing in short, sharp bursts. She adjusted her position, scanning for the sniper she had observed yesterday. The figure moved cautiously along a ridge, weapon trained, unaware she had anticipated this moment. She exhaled slowly, finger steady on the trigger, heart aligned with the rhythm of survival. She fired. The sniper dropped. Her team advanced, clearing the ridge systematically. She moved like water flowing through the chaos, precise, deliberate, calm. Each action carried the weight of responsibility, of past failures, of the silent promise she had made to herself and those she led. Hours stretched in relentless tension. The enemy had retreated into the valley's deeper hollows, but the danger was far from over. Every crevice, every shadow could conceal a threat. She guided her team forward, scanning constantly, aware that the mission's success and their survival depended on vigilance. During a brief lull, she crouched behind a rock, fingers brushing against the dirt, tracing the faint impressions left by the enemy's movement. The valley was alive with traces, small details that most would overlook. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, letting the weight of responsibility settle, letting the memory of past failures guide her decisions. "Lieutenant," Lennox's voice was low, almost reverent. How do you stay so focused?" She looked at him, eyes locking, unflinching. No words were necessary. Calm wasn't absence of fear. Focus wasn't denial. Presence was enough. He understood. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley, she allowed herself a brief pause. The team was intact, alive, coordinated. Every move, every calculation, every silent command had carried them through one of the most dangerous segments of the mission. Yet the weight of what was to come pressed on her chest. The heart of the enemy's position still awaited, and she knew that tomorrow would demand everything. She scanned the horizon, letting her gaze rest on the ridges, the shadows, the narrow paths that led into the unknown. Every scar she carried, every memory of failure, every lesson learned in blood and mud prepared her for what was next. Sometimes courage wasn't loud. Sometimes it was measured, deliberate, silent. It was in the gaze that steadied hands, in the breath that controlled panic, in the movement that ensured survival. And she carried that courage forward into the darkness, into the uncertain dawn, into the heart of the valley that demanded both resilience and sacrifice. She glanced at Lennox and the rest of her team. They had survived this day. They had endured the first wave of chaos. And she allowed herself a fraction of hope. Sometimes hope, fragile as it was enough to light the way forward. Tomorrow the true test would come. And she would meet it, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned to act despite fear, to lead despite doubt, and to endure despite loss. Sometimes the weight of responsibility was invisible to others. Sometimes the quietest actions carried the heaviest significance. And sometimes survival demanded both. Why did the valley seem to close in, suffocating, as if it knew what was coming? The morning light was pale, diffused by a thin mist that hugged the ridges. She crouched behind a jagged boulder, surveying the enemy's heart. Their defenses were stronger than expected, positions fortified, eyes everywhere, yet she felt no fear, only the sharpened clarity that came from necessity. Every step forward would demand focus, precision, and an unflinching resolve. Her team was close, shadows moving with her, ready but tense. Lennox's fingers flexed on his rifle, Ramirez adjusted his stance, Nguyen scanned continuously. She could feel the anticipation in every breath, every muscle, every flicker of the eye. This was the moment they had been moving toward, the point where experience, preparation, and courage converged. She inhaled slowly, letting memories of past failures and losses anchor her. Every action, every decision carried more than tactical weight. It carried the ghosts of comrades, the echoes of mistakes, the unspoken promise that she would protect those who relied on her. This was no longer about proving herself to the world. It was about survival, morality, and the quiet dignity of duty. The first enemy patrol appeared below. Her gaze swept over them like a hawk, calculating, patient, unyielding. She raised her hand, signaling her team to halt. Silence reigned. Every heartbeat, every breath seemed amplified in the misty valley. The enemy moved cautiously, unaware they were being watched. She signaled Ramirez and Nguyen to take positions flanking the ridge, and the team shifted seamlessly into cover. Her movements were deliberate, precise, as if the valley itself slowed to match her focus. Every second stretched, heavy with possibility and consequence. Then came the first shots, sharp, sudden, echoing off the cliffs. Chaos ignited in measured bursts. Her team moved with discipline, every action controlled, every response calculated. Bullets whined past, dirt and stone erupting in clouds. Yet her mind remained calm, every decision honed by years of experience and hard-earned instinct. A grenade clattered near Lennox again, this time closer, more dangerous. She dove, pushing him aside, rolling over the jagged earth, feeling the heat of the explosion as dust and stone enveloped them. She coughed, choking on grit but unscathed. He looked at her with wide, grateful eyes. She gave nothing but a steady gaze. Words were unnecessary. The lesson had been conveyed. Survival depended on presence, on calm, on resolve. The enemy regrouped, retreating slightly to fortified positions deeper in the valley. She knew the next move would decide everything. Time, patience, and precision would tip the scales. She signaled her team forward, each step deliberate, every movement a balance between speed and stealth. Her heart tightened as she surveyed the enemy fortifications. They were ready, determined, and armed. But she had something they didn't anticipate: calculation rooted in experience, patience forged in loss, and a quiet authority that carried beyond words. The team advanced, rifles raised, shadows among the cliffs. Bullets flew, ricocheting against rock, forcing momentary cover. She spotted a sniper nest ahead, positioned perfectly to cut off any approach. She gestured for Nguyen to flank, Ramirez covering, and moved herself to a vantage point, rifle steady. The first shot rang out. The sniper's position was neutralized, the nest silenced. Relief was brief, more threats remained. She signaled the team to press forward cautiously, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The enemy's morale was wavering, but they were still dangerous, still unpredictable. Then came the central enemy bunker, heavily guarded, entrenched, impossible to approach without risk. She scanned every approach, every possible flank. Every path carried danger, and yet she had no hesitation. Precision, patience, and courage guided her decisions. She gestured for the team to split. Lennox's eyes met hers, seeking reassurance. She gave none in words, only the calm, unyielding gaze that had silenced doubts before. Trust was implicit. They moved as one, a silent unit against the chaos of the valley. Gunfire erupted again, closer now. Bullets tore through the misty air, dust and stones exploding at their feet. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder than ever. Every decision could be fatal. Every hesitation could cost lives. She moved, directing, guiding, observing, calculating. Minutes stretched, each one heavy with consequence. She noticed a young enemy soldier faltering, hesitation in his movements. Something inside her tightened, not fear, not mercy, but awareness of humanity amidst the violence. Yet survival demanded action. She signaled Ramirez to cover, and she neutralized the threat with precise, controlled force. The bunker was breached. The enemy retreated in disarray. Her team held the ridge, victorious yet exhausted. Dust clung to their uniforms, sweat and blood streaked their faces, but they were alive. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ebb. Relief mingled with lingering adrenaline, exhaustion, and the moral weight of what they had done. She gathered the team, voice low, steady. "We held the ridge. We survived. Remember this. Every choice, every action matters, not just today, but always." As dusk fell, she allowed herself a quiet moment. Memories of past missions, losses, and regrets mingled with the faint warmth of pride and relief. Her gaze swept over the valley, now silent in the fading light. Shadows stretched long, but the immediate danger had passed. Sometimes courage was invisible, reciting not in words or accolades, but in silent endurance, deliberate action, and unwavering presence. Sometimes victory came quietly, in the breathless moments between fear and relief. and she carried that truth forward, steady as the setting sun, ready for whatever came next. She looked at Lennox Ramirez Nguyen, alive, resilient, trusting her. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself a brief smile. The weight of leadership, the burden of survival, the echoes of past failures, they had not broken her. They had refined her. Sometimes the hardest battles were fought not just in valleys and ridges, but within oneself. And sometimes surviving both was the greatest victory of all. Why did the valley feel impossibly still, as if holding its breath for what came next? The sun rose slowly, painting ridges and cliffs in muted gold. She stood at the edge of the final ridge, rifle resting lightly in her hands, eyes scanning the valley below. The enemy had retreated, leaving the paths clear, but the cost of survival weighed on her chest like stones. Dust clung to her uniform, sweat and grime streaked across her face, yet she felt the strange calm that only came after enduring the storm. Her team assembled behind her, weary but intact. Lennox shifted nervously, eyes wide as he took in the expanse before them. Ramirez leaned on his rifle, exhaustion etched into every line of his body. Nguyen silently checked comms, the relief in his expression subtle but present. She looked at them all and without words conveyed the truth. They had survived. Together. Memories surged unbidden, faces lost, promises broken, mistakes that had cost lives. She carried them like shadows, yet they no longer controlled her. Today she had acted not only with precision, but with the quiet authority born of pain, experience, and relentless determination. She had led, protected, endured. And in doing so, she had reclaimed a piece of herself. The wind stirred, brushing through her hair, carrying the faint scent of pine and dust. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the moment. Every ridge, every shadow, every subtle vibration of the earth had been a teacher. The mission was complete, but the lessons lingered. Leadership was not about recognition. Courage was not absence of fear. Strength was not measured by victories alone. It was measured by the quiet persistence to act, to endure, to protect, even when no one witnessed it. She lowered her gaze to Lennox. "Remember this," she said softly, voice steady despite exhaustion. "Presence matters more than words. Courage is deliberate. Survival, sometimes it's just about making the right choice at the right time, over and over again." He nodded, understanding deeper than she could articulate. He had seen it today, not in speeches or commands, but in the steady gaze that had guided them through chaos, in the calm breath that had silenced panic, in the hands that had acted without hesitation. She allowed herself a brief glance toward the valley below. The terrain was quiet now, almost serene, as if the earth itself was exhaling after the storm. She could feel the invisible scars of the day etched into her body and spirit, yet there was also a strange lightness, a sense that the worst had been faced, the impossible endured. A soft gust of wind carried a whisper of what had been lost and what had been saved. She let it pass, unflinching, absorbing the weight of both. Sometimes survival demanded action without recognition, courage without applause, endurance without celebration. And sometimes that was enough. She turned to the ridge, letting her eyes sweep across the horizon. The sun was higher now, casting long, golden beams across the valley. Her team followed her gaze, understanding the unspoken truth. The mission had changed them, refined them, revealed the depths of courage and resilience within each of them. For a moment she allowed herself to reflect on the words once thrown at her: mockery, doubt, derision. They meant nothing here in this valley, amidst dust, shadows, and the echoes of survival. Presence mattered more than judgment. Actions mattered more than applause. Silence had been her ally, her teacher, her shield. She lifted her rifle slightly, feeling its weight, the tool of both protection and necessity. She exhaled slowly, the day's tension leaving her in faint spirals. The mission had ended, yet the lessons would endure. She had endured. They had endured. And then she lowered the rifle, shoulders easing, gaze softening. The team gathered around her, silence stretching between them, not awkward but profound. No words could capture the breadth of what had been faced, the depth of what had been survived. And perhaps that was the point. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She stood there for a long moment, wind brushing through her hair, sunlight illuminating the valley like a quiet benediction. In that stillness, she felt the weight of survival, the resonance of courage, the quiet triumph of presence. The valley was calm, yet alive, and so was she. The team moved on slowly, following the path she had led them down. But she stayed a moment longer, gazing at the ridges, the shadows, the place where fear, courage, and endurance had collided. She carried the valley in her memory, the lessons in her heart, and the quiet strength of action in her soul. Sometimes survival is invisible. Sometimes courage is silent. And sometimes the most profound victories are not announced. They are felt, remembered, and carried forward. She turned, finally, letting the valley fade behind her. Every step was deliberate, every breath a testament to what had been endured and what had been gained. Sometimes the heaviest burdens are also the most meaningful, and sometimes the quietest acts speak louder than the loudest words.